You have probably heard the rule: 3 to 6 months of expenses saved in an accessible account. Most financial advice repeats it. Most people who have thought seriously about their finances have at least tried to follow it, and yet the majority of people who have built something close to that numbers still feel uneasy about it, not because they did it wrong, because the number itself is wrong, built for an economy that no longer exists. By the end of this video, you will know the real calculation, a specific number for your specific situation, and why the standard advice has been quietly failing the people who follow it most carefully. Most people who reach that number expect a feeling of security that does not fully arrive. That gap is the signal. The gap between the advice and the feeling is not a personal failure. It is a design flaw in the advice itself. If you have ever sat with your emergency fund balance and still felt like you did the thing you were supposed to do, but the security you expected never quite arrived, that feeling is not paranoia. It is accurate feedback. The 3 to 6 month rule has been the dominant emergency fund guidance for more than 50 years. It was built in the 1970s, when household fixed costs were a much smaller share of income. Job markets replaced faster, and cash held value between job losses. When all three underlying assumptions change simultaneously, the rule built on them does not need adjustment. It needs replacement. Those three assumptions have all changed, and nobody updated the rule. If you followed the advice, and it still does not feel like enough, that is not a discipline failure. That is a calibration failure. The input you were given was wrong. The rule was everywhere. Every financial book, every advisor, every article. It carried the weight of consensus. The economy that rule was built for had fundamentally different proportions. Fixed costs were a fraction of what they represent today. Here is the reframe. 3 to 6 months of expenses is not a number. It is a range so wide, it is meaningless. 3 months and 6 months are not slight variations on the same idea. They are two completely different financial positions. And expenses is the wrong unit. Total monthly expenses includes discretionary spending you would cut in an emergency alongside fixed obligations you cannot cut regardless. Those two categories behave completely differently in an actual emergency. An emergency fund built on total expenses is miscalibrated from the start. The real number is not a range. It is a calculation, and it has 3 inputs. The standard advice never mentions the same number means something completely different depending on your fixed obligation load, your job category, and where your money is held. A real emergency fund calculation requires all 3 inputs. Skipping any one of them produces a number that looks precise, but is not. Here is what the data shows. The first variable is your fixed obligation load. Fixed obligations are committed monthly costs that cannot be reduced without a major life change. Housing, insurance, healthcare, childcare, minimum debt service. For a median household, fixed obligations grew from approximately 42% of expenses in 2021, approximately 56% by 2025. An emergency fund built on total expenses is carrying excess cushion for spending you would cut immediately and potentially falling short on the fixed portion that keeps your household solvent. Most people calculate their emergency fund on the total expenses version. The fixed obligation version tells a different and more accurate story. The second variable is your income replacement time. By job category, the Bureau of Labor Statistics data shows average unemployment duration for professional roles runs 5.3 months. For service and trade roles, 2.1 months. For a professional household, that duration difference means the 3-month floor is not cautious. It is statistically likely to fail before the job search completes. If you are in a professional role, the 3-month end of the standard range is not conservative caution. It is statistically likely to run out before you have completed the average job search for your category. The third variable is the real cost of holding cash. Most emergency funds sit in traditional savings accounts earning well below inflation. A $20,000 emergency fund earning below 1% in a 3% inflation environment loses meaningful real purchasing power every single year. It sits untouched over 3 years. That erosion quietly reduces how many real months of coverage the fund actually provides without any change to the nominal balance. Most people never see this erosion because the balance does not change. The coverage does. Where you hold the emergency fund is not a secondary consideration. It is part of the calculation. The compounding effect means the gap between nominal protection and real protection widens every year. The fund is not recalibrated. Here is the behavioral science layer. Kahneman and Tversky's 1979 prospect theory. Research established that losses feel approximately twice as painful as equivalent gains feel rewarding. In emergency fund psychology, idle money feels like a loss every month. It earns nothing and is not used. The behavioral response is to underfund the emergency account, keeping just enough to satisfy the rule, to minimize the feeling of waste. Princeton behavioral economist Eldar Shafir found in 2013 that financial scarcity creates a cognitive narrowing effect. People calibrate their emergency fund to what feels manageable rather than what the math requires. The result is structurally underfunded emergency reserves across income levels, including households with objectively sufficient income to fund them correctly. This pattern is not about income level. The advice was calibrated wrong for almost everyone regardless of what they earn. Here is the one calculation that gives you a real number. In the next 24 hours, calculate your monthly fixed obligations only. Not total expenses, just the committed costs that would continue during an income gap. Housing, insurance, healthcare, childcare, minimum debt payments. Second, look up the average unemployment duration for your occupation type using Bureau Labor Statistics data. That is your income replacement benchmark. Multiply your monthly fixed obligations by your income replacement benchmark. Then add 30% as a buffer for variable costs that would persist even with discretionary cuts. That is your real emergency fund floor. For the first time, that calculation produces a number that belongs to you specifically, not a range built for everyone, and therefore no one. And once you have the right number, the right account takes approximately 10 minutes to open. The rate difference begins working immediately. For most professional households, this number is larger than what the standard advice produced. That is not a cause for panic. It is a cause for a specific, correctable adjustment. Wherever that money sits, it should be in a high-yield savings account, earning at least 4%. The rate gap on a $20,000 fund is nearly $700 per year. In real coverage. If this gave you a clearer target than you had before, drop a comment with the number you are working toward. And if you have not subscribed yet, the next video covers how to build toward that number without stripping your investment contributions. The sequencing most advice gets backwards. The rule you were given was not wrong when it was written. The economy it was written for no longer exists. Your number does.